Tonight, we uncover a story that shattered a family, shook a congregation to its core, and left an entire community grappling with questions of trust, betrayal, and the hidden darkness lurking beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect life. Reverend Marcus Caldwell was a man adored by his community, a preacher who dedicated his life to his faith, his family, and the people of Willow Creek, a small Chicago suburb that viewed him as a symbol of hope and integrity. With his wife, Evelyn, by his side, they were a couple that inspired admiration. For over 2 decades, they served not only their church but the broader community, raising 5 beautiful children in what many believed to be an idyllic home. Marcus was a man of conviction. His sermons were passionate and heartfelt, drawing people in from all walks of life. He preached about love, forgiveness, and the power of family. He was the kind of man who could look you in the eye and make you feel like everything would be okay. But what no one could have imagined, what no one dared to suspect, was that behind closed doors, the foundation of his seemingly perfect life was built on a lie. This is the story of how one discovery, a secret buried for years, unraveled everything Marcus Caldwell believed to be true. It's the story of betrayal so profound it left a respected man of God teetering on the edge of sanity. And ultimately, it's the story of a night of unspeakable violence that would end with the kind of horror no one in Willow Creek could have anticipated. Marcus Caldwell wasn't just a preacher. He was a husband, a father, a friend. Among his closest companions was Sheriff Darren Weller, a man he trusted implicitly, a man who stood by him through countless challenges and triumphs. But what happens when the bonds of friendship are tested by secrets too terrible to ignore? In late 2024, a series of small, seemingly insignificant doubts began to creep into Marcus's mind. Doubts about the children he had raised, the woman he had loved, and the friend he had trusted with his life. These doubts would lead him to take a step that would shatter his world forever. What Marcus uncovered was more than just a betrayal, it was a revelation that upended his identity, his faith, and his reason for being. And on a cold January night in 2025, this discovery culminated in an act so horrific, so unthinkable, that it left an entire community reeling. How could a man of God, a man who devoted his life to preaching love and forgiveness, commit such a heinous act? What drives someone to cross the line between reason and madness? And what can this tragic story teach us about the fragile nature of trust and the devastating consequences of betrayal? Tonight we take you inside the Caldwell home, inside the lives of a family torn apart, and inside the mind of a man pushed to the brink. If you enjoy true crime stories that challenge us to confront the darker corners of human nature, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now let's begin. Reverend Marcus Caldwell was a man who seemed destined for greatness, a figure whose presence could fill a room and whose voice carried a weight that resonated deeply with those who heard it. Born and raised on Chicago's South Side, Marcus came from humble beginnings. His childhood was marked by struggle, growing up in a neighborhood plagued by violence and poverty. But even as a young boy, Marcus stood apart, his charisma and determination drawing admiration from teachers, neighbors, and friends. By the time he was in his early 20s, Marcus had found his calling in ministry. He began preaching at small community churches, his sermons rich with passion and a sense of purpose. Marcus believed in the transformative power of faith, and he dedicated himself to helping others see that same light. His ability to connect with people on a deeply personal level quickly set him apart. In the early 2000s, Marcus was offered a position at Willow Creek Baptist Church, a modest but growing congregation in a suburban neighborhood of Chicago. Over the years, he grew the church into a vibrant community hub, attracting members from all over the city. He preached not only about salvation but about practical solutions to the challenges his congregation faced: poverty, addiction, broken families. For many, Marcus wasn't just a preacher, he was a mentor, a counselor, and a friend. But Marcus wasn't just admired for his work in the church. He was seen as a devoted family man. Married to Evelyn Caldwell for over 20 years, Marcus often spoke of his love for his wife and their 5 children during his sermons. To his congregation, the Caldwells represented an ideal, a family rooted in faith and love, a beacon of hope in a world filled with uncertainty. If Marcus was the soul of the Willow Creek community, Evelyn Caldwell was its heart. She was the quiet strength behind Marcus's larger-than-life persona, a woman who dedicated herself to supporting her husband's ministry and raising their 5 children. Evelyn was warm, approachable, and endlessly patient, a devoted wife and mother who seemed to have it all together. The Caldwell children, 3 boys and 2 girls, were as much a part of the church as their parents. From a young age, they participated in Sunday school, youth group activities and church outreach programs. The family was a fixture at every community event, from holiday food drives to summer picnics. To those on the outside looking in, the Caldwells were the epitome of a perfect family. But there was one relationship that stood out even within their tight-knit circle: their bond with Sheriff Darren Weller. Darren had been Marcus's friend for years, long before the preacher came to Willow Creek. The two men shared a unique connection, one built on mutual respect and trust. Darren was a respected figure in his own right. As the sheriff of Cook County, he was known for his dedication to justice and his hands-on approach to community policing. He and Marcus often worked together on initiatives aimed at reducing crime and helping at-risk youth. The two families grew close over the years, with Darren frequently visiting the Caldwell home and joining them for meals, celebrations, and even vacations. Darren's presence in the Caldwell household felt natural. To Marcus, he was more than a friend. He was a brother in faith, a man who shared his vision of building a stronger, safer community. And to Evelyn, Darren was a trusted confidant, someone who always seemed to have the right words in times of stress or uncertainty. Their bond was so seamless, so unquestioned, that no one thought to look deeper. Willow Creek was the kind of place where neighbors waved to one another from their front porches, where children played freely in the streets, and where church bells marked the rhythm of daily life. Nestled on the outskirts of Chicago, the suburb had a charm that drew families looking for a quieter, safer way of life. It was a community built on trust and shared values, a place where everyone knew everyone. In Willow Creek, the church was more than just a place of worship. It was the heart of the community. It was where people gathered to celebrate life's milestones, to grieve losses, and to find comfort in times of uncertainty. And at the center of it all was Marcus Caldwell. Marcus wasn't just a preacher. He was a leader, a counselor, and a unifying force. His sermons were the highlight of every Sunday, drawing standing-room-only crowds. His words had a way of cutting through the noise of everyday life, offering clarity and hope. But Marcus's influence extended far beyond the pulpit. He organized food drives for struggling families, coordinated youth mentorship programs, and even mediated disputes between neighbors. To the people of Willow Creek, Marcus was more than just a man of God, he was a man of the people. Evelyn, too, played a vital role in the community. She led women's Bible study groups, volunteered at the local food bank, and opened her home to anyone in need of guidance or support. Together, the Caldwells were seen as pillars of the community, the kind of family that others aspired to emulate. But in a community built on trust and appearances, secrets have a way of hiding in plain sight. And in the Caldwell home, behind the warmth and the smiles, lay a secret that would soon bring this picture-perfect life crashing down. The betrayal that was about to be uncovered would not only destroy the image of the ideal family but would also leave the people of Willow Creek questioning everything they thought they knew about the Caldwells, and about themselves. Coming up next, we'll uncover the moment that changed everything, the discovery that shattered Marcus Caldwell's world and set in motion a chain of events that would lead to an unspeakable tragedy. Stay with us. For more than 20 years, Marcus Caldwell had embraced his role as a father with pride. Each of his 5 children was a source of joy, his sermons often peppered with anecdotes from their lives. He prided himself on being a present, loving, and dependable parent, a reflection of the values he preached from the pulpit. But in the latter months of 2024, Marcus began to notice things he couldn't quite ignore. It started subtly. An innocent comment from a congregation member about how his youngest daughter had a striking resemblance to Sheriff Darren Weller. Marcus laughed it off at the time, dismissing it as a harmless observation. But once the thought was planted, it lingered. He started paying closer attention, scrutinizing every detail of his children's faces, their mannerisms, and their personalities. His oldest son had Darren's piercing blue eyes, a trait that neither Marcus nor Evelyn possessed. His youngest son's mischievous grin reminded him uncomfortably of his best friend. The more he looked, the more the similarities between his children and Darren became impossible to ignore. At first, Marcus tried to suppress the gnawing doubts. He told himself he was being paranoid, that he was imagining things. After all, Darren was like a brother to him. The two men had built a bond of trust over years of shared work and friendship. To suspect otherwise felt like a betrayal of that bond. But the doubts refused to go away. As the holidays approached, Marcus's unease grew. The thought of spending another Christmas celebrating the family he wasn't sure was truly his became unbearable. One evening, while Evelyn was out running errands, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He ordered DNA testing kits for each of his 5 children. He didn't tell Evelyn about the tests. Deep down he feared her reaction. But he justified his actions as necessary, telling himself he needed the truth, whatever it might be. Marcus collected the samples himself, carefully following the instructions on the kits. He packaged the swabs and mailed them, his hands trembling as he dropped the envelope into the mailbox. Then all he could do was wait. The results arrived 2 weeks later, just days before Christmas. Marcus had been restless during the waiting period, avoiding Evelyn's gaze and throwing himself into church activities to distract himself. But now, as he sat alone in his study, the envelope in his hands, he felt a crushing weight settle on his chest. He opened the envelope and pulled out the report. His eyes scanned the pages, his heart pounding in his ears. One by one he read the results for each child. And with each name, the same conclusion stared back at him in cold, clinical terms. There was a 0% probability of biological paternity. Marcus felt his world collapse around him. He read and reread the report, hoping he had misunderstood, that there had been some kind of mistake. But the evidence was undeniable. The children he had raised, loved, and sacrificed for were not his. The shock was compounded by the revelation of who their biological father was. The DNA results indicated a match with Sheriff Darren Weller. Not just 1 or 2 of the children, all 5. Marcus sat in silence for hours, unable to process what he had just discovered. He thought of Evelyn, the woman he had loved and trusted for over 2 decades. He thought of Darren, his closest friend, a man he had considered a brother. The betrayal felt insurmountable, a double-edged sword that cut him to his very core. He tried to piece together the timeline, to understand how long this betrayal had been going on. How could he have been so blind? How could Evelyn and Darren have kept this from him for so many years? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more painful than the last. In the days that followed, Marcus began to unravel. He stopped attending church functions, leaving his congregation confused and concerned. The once charismatic preacher who had always been a source of strength for others now seemed like a shadow of himself. At home, the tension between Marcus and Evelyn was palpable. Evelyn noticed the change in him. His quietness, his avoidance of eye contact, the way he recoiled from her touch. She asked him repeatedly what was wrong, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to confront her. Every time he looked at her, he saw the betrayal. Every time he looked at his children, he was reminded of the truth he now carried like a heavy burden. Evelyn, unaware of the DNA tests, assumed Marcus was simply under stress. She tried to console him, but her attempts only deepened his anger and despair. To Marcus, her concern felt like mockery, a cruel reminder of the lies she had been living. On New Year's Eve, the family gathered for what should have been a joyful celebration. But Marcus's demeanor cast a shadow over the festivities. He barely spoke, sitting silently as his children laughed and played. Evelyn tried to engage him, but he brushed her off, his gaze distant and unreadable. By the time the clock struck midnight, Marcus was already upstairs, alone in his study. He stared at the DNA report spread out on his desk, the weight of the betrayal suffocating him. Marcus's world had been turned upside down. The man who had dedicated his life to preaching about love, forgiveness, and family was now consumed by anger, humiliation, and despair. And as the days passed, those emotions began to fester, growing darker and more dangerous. What had started as a suspicion had now become an unbearable truth, one that Marcus couldn't escape no matter how hard he tried. And soon, that truth would drive him to an act of unspeakable violence. Coming up next, we'll examine the night everything came to a head, a confrontation that would leave one person dead and a community forever changed. Stay tuned. It was a bitterly cold evening in Chicago, the kind of night when the city streets were eerily quiet, blanketed by snow and silence. Inside the Caldwell home, however, the tension was anything but quiet. January 3, 2025, began like any other day for the Caldwell family. Evelyn prepared breakfast, her usual cheerful self, while Marcus sat at the kitchen table, barely touching his food. Their children, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, went about their routines. But Marcus was not himself. His mind was a swirling vortex of rage and humiliation. The betrayal had consumed him entirely, and by the time the children left for a sleepover at a relative's house that evening, the fragile facade of normalcy had crumbled completely. As the night wore on, Marcus confronted Evelyn in the living room. The conversation began with a tense accusation. Marcus demanded to know the truth about their children's paternity. Evelyn, caught off guard, initially denied everything. But Marcus pressed on, his voice rising, his anger boiling over. He revealed the DNA test results, throwing the papers onto the coffee table. Evelyn's face went pale as she realized the secret she had kept for so long was now exposed. She tried to explain, stammering about mistakes and regrets, but her words only fueled Marcus's fury. He shouted at her, demanding to know how she could betray him not just once but repeatedly for years. Evelyn tried to defuse the situation, pleading with Marcus to calm down, but the confrontation only escalated. Neighbors later reported hearing shouting and the sound of breaking glass, though none of them intervened. They assumed it was just another domestic argument, something that would blow over by morning. But inside the Caldwell home, the argument took a darker turn. As Evelyn attempted to leave the room, Marcus snapped. The years of betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, it all exploded in a single violent moment. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Marcus grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel. He swung it with all his strength, striking Evelyn on the side of her head. She fell to the floor, blood pooling beneath her, her lifeless eyes staring up at the man she had betrayed. For a moment, the house fell silent. The reality of what he had done began to sink in. But instead of calling the police or seeking help, Marcus made a decision that would transform an already tragic act into something even more horrifying. Driven by panic and a twisted sense of self-preservation, Marcus set out to cover his tracks. He dragged Evelyn's body to the basement, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Under the dim light of the basement bulb, Marcus retrieved a hacksaw from his toolbox. What happened next was an act so gruesome it left even seasoned investigators speechless. Marcus methodically dismembered Evelyn's body, separating it into smaller parts to make disposal easier. He wrapped each piece in black garbage bags, sealing them tightly with duct tape. He then placed the bags in the basement freezer, stacking them carefully as if they were nothing more than frozen groceries. The smell of bleach soon filled the house as Marcus scrubbed the bloodstains from the floor and walls. By the time he was done, the basement looked spotless, the evidence of his crime seemingly erased. But no amount of cleaning could erase the guilt and horror etched into Marcus's mind. For the next 2 days, Marcus carried on as if nothing had happened. He attended church, delivered a sermon, and greeted members of the congregation with his usual warmth. But Evelyn's sudden absence did not go unnoticed. Neighbors who were used to seeing Evelyn in the mornings, walking her dog or tending to the garden, found it strange that she had seemingly disappeared. One neighbor, Sarah Jensen, became particularly concerned. She noticed that Marcus was acting strangely, avoiding eye contact and brushing off questions about Evelyn's whereabouts. On January 5, Sarah decided to act. She called the local police, expressing her concerns and mentioning that she hadn't seen Evelyn in days. The call set off a chain of events that would bring the truth to light. When officers arrived at the Caldwell residence, Marcus greeted them at the door, his demeanor calm but guarded. He told them Evelyn had left town to clear her head, claiming she needed space after a marital disagreement. But something about his story didn't sit right with the officers. They noticed the faint smell of bleach in the air and the way Marcus avoided inviting them inside. Suspicious but lacking evidence, they left to obtain a search warrant. The following day, armed with the warrant, investigators returned to the Caldwell home. What they found in the basement freezer shocked even the most seasoned officers. Inside the neatly sealed garbage bags were the remains of Evelyn Caldwell, each piece meticulously wrapped and labeled. The discovery confirmed their worst fears. Marcus Caldwell, the beloved preacher and community leader, had committed an act of unspeakable violence. But the horror of his crime was only beginning to unfold. As investigators began to piece together the events of that fateful night, they uncovered a web of betrayal, lies, and rage that had been building for years. In the next chapter, we'll explore the police investigation, the evidence they gathered, and the chilling confession that left everyone asking, how could this happen? The investigation into Evelyn Caldwell's disappearance began with a simple welfare check, but it quickly escalated into something far darker. On the evening of January 6, 2025, police officers arrived at the Caldwell residence. Marcus greeted them at the door, his calm demeanor masking the storm that had already consumed his life. When questioned about Evelyn, Marcus repeated his earlier story, that she had left town to clear her head after a marital disagreement. He spoke with a controlled tone, but there was something off about his delivery. As officers stood on the porch, they couldn't ignore the faint smell of bleach wafting from inside the home. One officer, trained to recognize signs of a crime scene cleanup, pressed Marcus further. His answers grew shorter, his demeanor more defensive. The officers requested permission to enter the home, but Marcus hesitated. He claimed the house was in disarray and insisted there was no reason to come inside. The officers, now deeply suspicious, left the property and immediately sought a search warrant. By the following morning, with a warrant in hand, investigators returned to the Caldwell residence. The search began methodically, room by room. It wasn't until they reached the basement that the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The smell of bleach was overpowering, and despite Marcus's efforts to clean, small traces of blood were discovered on the floor and along the baseboards. Then they opened the freezer. Inside, investigators found several black garbage bags, meticulously sealed with duct tape. When the bags were opened, their worst fears were confirmed. The dismembered remains of Evelyn Caldwell lay before them, each piece carefully wrapped and frozen. The discovery shocked even the most seasoned officers, who had never encountered a crime scene so meticulously orchestrated and coldly calculated. As investigators combed through the evidence in the Caldwell home, it became clear that this was not a spur-of-the-moment act. Marcus had spent considerable time and effort planning how to cover up his crime and shift the blame onto someone else. In a locked drawer in Marcus's study, police uncovered a handwritten notebook that detailed a chilling scheme. The notebook contained plans to frame Sheriff Darren Weller for Evelyn's murder. It outlined steps to plant evidence, fabricate a motive, and even stage a confrontation to make Darren appear guilty. The entries revealed a man consumed by rage and humiliation, meticulously plotting revenge against the man who had betrayed him. One entry read, "He took everything from me, my wife, my children, my dignity. You will pay for this." Further examination of the notebook and Marcus's computer revealed internet searches about crime scene cleanup, dismemberment techniques, and methods to avoid detection. Investigators also found receipts for the cleaning supplies he had purchased in the days leading up to Evelyn's murder. The extent of Marcus's planning painted a picture of a man whose mind had been twisted by betrayal, leading him to commit an unthinkable act and attempt to shift the blame onto his former best friend. But as investigators dug deeper, they found more than just evidence of Marcus's crime. They uncovered the truth about the long-standing affair that had driven him to this point. While Marcus sat in custody, investigators turned their attention to Sheriff Darren Weller. As a respected law enforcement officer and longtime friend of Marcus, Darren's involvement in the case added another layer of complexity and public interest. When questioned about the paternity of the Caldwell children, Darren initially denied any knowledge of the affair. He claimed his relationship with Evelyn was purely platonic and that he had no idea Marcus wasn't the biological father of the children. However, digital forensic analysis painted a different picture. Investigators retrieved text messages and emails exchanged between Darren and Evelyn over the course of 15 years. The messages revealed an intimate relationship that had begun shortly after Marcus and Evelyn's marriage and continued well into the present day. One particularly damning message, sent by Evelyn to Darren just weeks before her death, read, "I can't keep living this lie. Marcus is starting to suspect, and I don't know how much longer I can keep this from him." Darren's involvement in the affair became undeniable. While he maintained that he had no role in Evelyn's murder, the evidence of their long-standing relationship and his paternity of the Caldwell children left him under intense scrutiny. As news of the affair broke, Darren was suspended from his position as sheriff, pending an internal investigation. The public, once supportive of him, began to question his integrity and his role in the events that led to Evelyn's death. The revelations about Darren's betrayal only deepened the tragedy of the case, highlighting the devastating consequences of broken trust and unspoken truths. With Marcus Caldwell in custody and Darren Weller's reputation in tatters, the stage was set for a trial that would expose even more shocking details about the lives of those involved. The trial and verdict. The investigation had uncovered a web of betrayal, rage, and calculated violence that left the community of Willow Creek in shock. But as the case moved to trial, the courtroom became the stage for a dramatic battle between prosecution and defense, as both sides sought to uncover the truth behind the tragedy. In the next chapter, we'll explore the trial, the evidence presented, and the verdict that brought this chilling case to a close. The trial of Reverend Marcus Caldwell was one of the most anticipated legal proceedings in recent history. The shocking details of the case, combined with the moral and ethical questions it raised, drew nationwide attention. Prosecutors wasted no time presenting their case against Marcus. He was charged with first-degree murder, dismemberment of a human body, and obstruction of justice. The prosecution's strategy was clear: to paint Marcus as a man driven by rage, who had meticulously planned and executed the murder of his wife after uncovering her long-standing betrayal. The centerpiece of the prosecution's case was Marcus's confession, which had been recorded during his interrogation. In the recording, Marcus recounted in chilling detail the events of January 3, 2025. His voice trembled as he described the argument that escalated into violence, his attempts to clean up the crime scene, and his plan to frame Darren Weller. The jury sat in silence as prosecutors played the recording, their faces etched with shock and horror. It was a rare glimpse into the mind of a man pushed to the brink by betrayal and humiliation. But Marcus's defense team argued that the crime was not premeditated. They claimed that Marcus had acted in the heat of the moment, overcome by a sudden wave of emotion after Evelyn's taunts during their argument. They called several witnesses, including mental health experts, who testified about Marcus's psychological state at the time of the crime. One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Marcus took the stand in his own defense. With tears streaming down his face, he described the depth of his pain upon discovering the truth about his children and the betrayal by his wife and closest friend. He admitted to his actions but begged the jury to understand the unbearable torment he had endured. "I gave everything to my family, my church and my community," Marcus said, his voice cracking with emotion. "To find out that it was all built on a lie, it broke something inside me that I couldn't fix." The courtroom was divided. Some felt sympathy for Marcus, believing he had been pushed to his breaking point. Others saw his actions as inexcusable regardless of the circumstances. The prosecution countered by emphasizing the meticulous nature of his crime and the cold, calculated steps he had taken afterward. The trial lasted 4 weeks, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. But as the case drew to a close, the evidence against Marcus was overwhelming. Outside the courtroom, the trial was the talk of the nation. Media outlets from across the country descended on Chicago to cover every detail of the case. Headlines screamed of betrayal, murder, and the fall of a revered spiritual leader. In Willow Creek, the community was reeling. The same people who had once looked to Marcus Caldwell for guidance and inspiration now grappled with the horrifying reality of his actions. For many, the trial forced them to confront uncomfortable questions about trust, morality, and the fragility of the human psyche. Interviews with Marcus's former congregants revealed a range of emotions. Some expressed disbelief, unable to reconcile the man they had admired with the heinous crime he had committed. Others, however, spoke of their anger and betrayal, feeling that Marcus had not only let down his family but also the entire community. The role of the media in amplifying the story was undeniable. True crime documentaries, podcasts, and news specials dissected every aspect of the case, from the DNA results to Marcus's detailed plans to frame Darren Weller. Some outlets sensationalized the story, focusing on the salacious details of Evelyn's affair and Darren's betrayal. Others took a more measured approach, exploring the psychological and societal factors that led to the tragedy. For the Caldwell children, the media frenzy was a nightmare. Now living with extended family, they found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their lives forever changed by the actions of the adults they had trusted most. Public sympathy for the children was overwhelming, with many calling for privacy and support as they navigated the aftermath of the tragedy. On February 20, 2025, the jury delivered its verdict. After deliberating for less than 2 days, they found Marcus Caldwell guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, dismemberment of a human body, and obstruction of justice. When the verdict was read, Marcus sat motionless, his face devoid of emotion. But his defense team later revealed that he had expected this outcome, having expressed little hope of leniency from the jury. During the sentencing phase, the judge addressed Marcus directly, saying, "Your actions were not only a violation of the law but a betrayal of the trust placed in you by your family, your community, and your faith. While your pain is undeniable, it does not excuse the calculated and heinous nature of your crime." Marcus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The severity of the sentence reflected the judge's belief that Marcus's actions had shattered not only his own family but the broader community as well. As for Darren Weller, he faced his own reckoning. Although he was not charged with any crimes, his affair with Evelyn and his role as the biological father of the Caldwell children led to an internal investigation within the Cook County Sheriff's Department. Public pressure mounted for his resignation, and by the end of 2025, Darren stepped down from his position, his career in law enforcement effectively over. The verdict and sentencing brought some closure to the case, but the scars it left on Willow Creek and the nation would take much longer to heal. The story of Marcus Caldwell, Evelyn Caldwell, and Darren Weller became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of betrayal, rage, and broken trust. Aftermath and theories. The trial may have ended, but the story was far from over. In the wake of the tragedy, Questions lingered about what could have been done to prevent it and how the lives of those left behind would be forever altered. In the next chapter, we'll explore the aftermath of the case, the impact on the community, and the lingering theories about the events that led to this shocking crime. The ones who bore the heaviest burden in the aftermath of this tragedy were the Caldwell children. For them, the revelations about their paternity, the violent loss of their mother, and the incarceration of their father left scars that no amount of time could fully heal.